Well, I want to thank Brenda because I think she did a great segue into what I'm going to do. So thank you, Brenda. That was wonderful. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the emotional, spiritual, and family aspects around end-of-life planning and end-of-life care. So the question becomes, how do we start the conversation? I'm here to tell you that's a very good question. And I don't have the one-size-fits-all answer. The deal is that the conversations, for example, that I had with even my parents were very different from each other. And it is different for every person, every situation, and every circumstance. You hear about, the nervousness and the butterflies in the stomach. Well, that's certainly something you may feel when you start to have this conversation. And that's perfectly okay. That's a very normal reaction. What's important, though, is that you start. Start the conversation. You need to be open, honest, be transparent, but you can't keep it to yourself. You've got to remember to share it, and not just with one person. You need to be able to share it with all those people who are a part of your life. And it's okay if you're going to fumble through the words. This is not something that we can just talk through like a very happy event. The one thing that is important, though, is attitude. We can look at this as something that's going to be a very morbid exercise, or we can look at it as being a life-giving exercise. This is an opportunity to create memories. This is an opportunity to strengthen bonds. This is an opportunity to share that very deep core of who you are with people that you love. I think children's books have a great idea. And so I chose Winnie the Pooh to help us through today. And Winnie the Pooh said, "How lucky I am to have something that makes saying goodbye so hard. Isn't that the truth?" That's why this conversation is hard, because we don't want to say goodbye. But the reality is, at some point, we have to. So here are some realities that we really need to consider in our discussions. Number one is we are all dying. From the moment we're born, we are dying. We, however, live in a very death-defying culture, and we think if we don't talk about it, it's not going to happen. I remember Dr. Chachinov in our last forum said, "If you have a pulse, one day you will not." And that is very true. And again, I choose the attitude with which I live. Why would I not choose the attitude with which I die? So state things very, very clearly. And that's important because then it's less of a burden for those people who are left. They can continue on being part of this journey with you rather than trying to figure stuff out. Okay? So remember, and the other thing to remember is this is a process. Just because I say something today doesn't mean that it's going to be something that I want 10 years down the road. It's okay to change your mind. But again, make sure that you tell people you've changed your mind. Or else remember what you told them last time and not what you want this time. Okay? It is also important because people can't fulfill your wishes if they don't know what your wishes are. They need to know what it is that you want. Otherwise, they can't help you through the process. Rituals, funerals, those are for the living. It helps us on our grief journey. I've heard many seniors say it's too much of a burden. What they don't realize is that often it's more of a burden when you don't have the ritual because there's no impetus to help the grief journey. They should know that's not accurate. I mean, my nieces know I love them, but I think every once in a while they like to hear that I love them. And I know they love me, but I really love hearing that they love me. And so stating they should know is not always accurate. We need to speak the words, and we need to make them clear. The other thing to remember is values and beliefs will influence wishes. I have an Italian culture background. It affects my wishes. It will affect how I view things, which will be very different than someone from a different culture or a different faith tradition. It's important to honor all those pieces. And the last reality, and there's many more, these are just some that I picked. Death is not age discriminate, okay? There's nothing that says at 65 you're going to die. There's nothing that says at 35 you're going to live. So that's a very important reality to acknowledge. Speaking of death and dying is a very difficult subject. It is not one that comes easily, but it is one nonetheless that we have to speak about. I want to share with you, my father converted to Jehovah's Witness. I am a Roman Catholic. They're two very different faiths. I could not possibly know what my father wanted if we had not had the discussion. And I had to honor his wishes, because they were his wishes. And so that is part of the conversation. And remember that faith plays a very important part. If faith is strong and important to a person, it will impact how they want their dying to happen. Okay? The other thing is, it's important to remember that there are going to be a variety of emotions through these discussions. And I'm going to talk more about that a little later. They're all okay. All those emotions are okay. They're natural, they're part of who we are. The other thing to remember is, I was my parents' power of attorney and their executrix. However, I was not their only child. It's very important that my parents also had the discussions with my siblings. And we had the discussions together. We were all on the same page. That created a much smoother time that we could spend quality time with our parents rather than debating things. Here are a few superstitions that I've heard. I'm not a superstitious person, so I always get chuckle out of superstitions. The first one is, if I write a will, I will die. Okay, I have something to tell you. I've had a will since I was 18 years old, and I'm still here. So, you know what? Writing a will does not mean you're going to die. Okay? And I didn't write my will because I thought I was going to die. I wrote my will because I wanted people to know. I wanted it to be simple. If my family is grieving, I don't want them to have to deal with all the little itty-bitty pieces that I could have dealt with. And so that's why I had a will and a power of attorney. Now understand, I have changed that will a numerous amount of times. When my father died, I had to change my forms. When I entered religious life, I changed them again. And I might change them a few more times. And that's okay. But I have the discussion every time I do it. The other thing is, if I think about my or someone else's dying, I or they will die. Wow, that's a lot of power to put into someone's hand that you don't really have. The reality is that's out of your control. But having the discussion is not. I'm tempting fate. Well, again, that's a lot of power that you really don't have. So things happen. That's life. The reality is it's going to happen whether you write the will or not. Things are going to happen. If I don't talk about it, it will go away. Yeah, good luck with that, because that is so not true. Okay? The reality is we are all going to die. That is the reality. If I don't talk about dying, I'm still going to die. So it's important to make sure that people know what it is that I want. And one size fits all. Thank God that's not true, because we are all very unique people, and so is our dying. It will be very different for each and every one of us. So how do we start the conversation? Well, you start from a place of love. You start from a place of concern, and you start from a place of peace. And maybe what you do is you say, I went to this forum, and this was the topic. But we need to make sure we have the discussion. And make a list of some of the stuff that you want to discuss. What are your funeral arrangements? What do you want to see happen in your dying process? Do you want to donate your organs or your tissues? Okay? A lot of people don't want to die alone. Make sure that that's clear as well. There's a fear of abandonment that often happens when someone is dying. There's also, what is my legacy? And this is a great way to get that legacy talk. Because when you're having this discussion, you are leaving a legacy because you're creating memories. It's important to remember that this is a process. It is not an end-all and be-all. It's a process. And as with any process, there will be hiccups, and there will be changes, and that's all okay. And remember that oftentimes when a person is dying, there can be ethical dilemmas if you have not had the conversation. It is not fair that someone who is dying have siblings arguing at the foot of the bed about what's right for mom and dad. Whereas if they've had the discussion, it can be a smoother process. So remember, communicate, communicate, communicate. That is the basis of all good knowing what you want. Let's look at some of the emotions that might happen. And again, Brenda talked about a lot of emotions. One of them is anticipatory grief. So anticipatory grief is that grief when you think of what could happen. Okay? It's important that we acknowledge this because anticipating the death of someone you love is difficult. For spouses, it's the loss of a partner. For a child who's looking at losing their last parent and becoming an orphan, that's an anticipatory grief. And it's important to remember that even happy occasions have grief in them because any sort of loss or change has grief in it. And it's okay to acknowledge that. The other thing to remember is the family dynamics that are part of it. Okay? We are all grieving very differently. The way I grieved was very different than the way my sister grieves and the way my brother grieves. And so it's important to remember those pieces. And each person has a different idea of what should and shouldn't happen. But because my parents told us what they wanted, we were able to be with them on their journey of dying rather than arguing about it. Okay? It also creates less of a burden if things are clear. It makes it simpler in that I don't have to think about all those other pieces. Grief is a deep enough journey. It is a hard enough journey that we don't need to want to think about some of the other stuff that happens. Okay? There's also a lot of peace in a situation if things are settled. Okay? And again, this is a perfect opportunity for creating memories. I remember recently we were at my sister's and we looked through a lot of pictures. It was a wonderful time to share and to bond. And this is also a perfect opportunity to do that. You might learn stories about your parents, your siblings that you never knew. And this is a wonderful time to do that. It's important to recognize grief is constant in our lives. It doesn't go away. Every piece of our life, every time there's a change, we grieve. And this is no different. This is also a perfect time to express love for one another and to define how those memories have played an important part in your life. The other thing to remember is when a person is dying, they will question their faith. Even a person who has been a staunch faith believer will question, and that's perfectly okay. It's important to remember, though, that often that faith can also be a great piece to them if we all make sure that we incorporate it into the right context. These are some of the things that we're going to feel. And again, this is not just when a person is dying, this is even in the discussion. We're going to have all these feelings. And you know what? They're all good because emotions are healthy. And it's a roller coaster ride through anything in our lives that's difficult. Remember that even anger, if you use it to clear the air and not do something illegal, is a good emotion. Okay? Anger in itself is not a bad emotion. It's what we do with anger. Okay? Here's the other thing. It's okay to cry. I don't care how old I get. I still cry. And it's okay to do that. It is not a sign of weakness. It is not a sign that you think things are awful. Even in happy times, we cry. Those are all good things. The thing that's important to remember is that we need to honor what people wish. Now, again, providing it's not illegal, it's all good stuff, you know? And so we need to honor all those pieces, but they can't know what it is that you want if you don't tell them. I'm just going to touch on grief briefly as well. It's important that we don't internalize grief, because what happens is if we internalize grief, all that happens is that it causes more problems. Okay? It's important that we express our grief. And oftentimes people say, how am I supposed to be with someone who's grieving? Honestly, it is not easy, but often all they want is someone to listen to their story. All they want is someone to hear what their memories are of their loved ones. And that is not difficult. Just provide a ministry of presence. Okay? The other thing is, remember that grief is natural, it is normal, and is not the same for any two people. It's important to honor that we all grieve very differently. It's also important to honor that our grief sometimes can take longer in different phases. So we need to honor all those pieces. It's also important to remember grief is lifelong. It doesn't go away at the drop of a hat. Grief is lifelong. So we need to honor all those pieces. Many of us have heard about the 5 stages of grief. It's important to remember that these don't happen in any particular order. Okay? And some people go back and forth. Some people never get to all the stages. It's important to honor all those different pieces. Okay? And again, there's no time frame, there's no set rules, there's no set guidelines. We just need to honor that they go as they go. The best legacy through grief is memories. So create some memories, because that's what carries people on their grief journey. So here are a few last-minute things to remember. Number 1, don't downplay the importance of the spiritual, philosophical aspects of a person's belief system. These are the things that carry them through life. Every single one of us is a spiritual being. Every single one of us. We may not be religious, but we are all spiritual. And it's important to acknowledge that part of us. Because that spirituality is, who am I? Why am I here? What is my purpose in life? That is spirit. So that is a part of each and every one of us. The next thing is constant communication. Keep people informed. I don't think I can stress that enough, because they can't know what you want if you don't tell them. They need to hear it. In writing, verbally, any manner, they need to know it. And they can't know it if you just think it, because I'm not psychic. And I don't know that many of us, I can't know what my parents were thinking if they didn't share it with me. Okay? Remember that just because they think I should know doesn't mean that I did. Okay? Update as often as necessary. Remember, it's a process. Like I said, I've changed my documents many times. I will change them more. And that's all okay. Update as necessary. When circumstances change, update your wishes. That's a very important piece. The other thing is, remember, it's about the wishes of the person. It is not about what I wanted, it was about what my parents wanted. And I needed to honor what their wishes were. It wasn't about me. Remember that grief is a very individual journey. There's no one way to grieve. We cannot judge any person on their grief journey. Know your roles and limits. We are part of a plan. When my parents asked that these be their wishes, we were part of their plan. So I needed to know that it was about their plan, and that was my limit. Those were the boundaries around their plan. So we need to honor those pieces. The other thing is promote family. This is a great opportunity for reconciliation, for sharing, for being on the same page. It's a perfect opportunity for all those things. And again, it's about creating those memories. Be realistic about your resources. None of us can do it alone. We all have limits. We all, whether it be financial, emotional, spiritual, whatever the case might be, we all have limits. So know your resources and use those resources. Remember self-care. Okay? I am not going to be effective to someone if I get sick on top of their being sick. So remember to take care of yourselves as well. Counseling and support groups are there to help. You know, there's often some people come, oh, I'm not going for counseling. I said, well, why not? I went after my father died. I went after my mother died. I still go. It is not a sign of weakness. It is a sign of a healthy person to get help they need when they need it. And the last thing is remember to listen. Listen to what is being said. Listen to what people are sharing with you. Because again, those are creating memories, they're creating the legacy, and it makes it a very life-giving discussion if we open ourselves up to that. I want to end with a quote. Sharing of a journey is life-giving. Don't miss out on the memories. Don't miss out on the opportunity to save ourselves and our loved ones from the turmoil that can happen. This is a quote. A friend of mine was 32 years old when she died. This is the quote that's on her tombstone. Death leaves a heartache no one can heal. Love leaves a memory no one can steal. Let love be your guide on this journey. It can be a wonderful journey if you let it be.